Thank you all for coming. This is the third of our linguistic workshop with Dr. Andrea Nini. I would like to welcome everyone to our workshop, and I'll pass the microphone to Mr. Nini.
Right. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, well, at least virtually.
It is a pleasure for us too.
Thank you. So I'll try to share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay, so I'll begin. If there are any problems, let me know. Because I can't see anything right now. I can only see my slides. Okay, so so today I'll talk about profiling, and more specifically the use of profiling evidence in court. So just, I don't know if the audience is familiar with this concept, so I'll start with the very basics. So when we have a disputed anonymous document, then often the question is, there is a close set of suspects, and each of the suspects has some documents that they wrote, and the question is, could be who was the author of this text among the set of suspects. And this is a task that has been called authorship attribution in the literature. Another task that is actually far more common is when you have a disputed document and only one suspect. And here the problem is to verify whether this suspect is potentially the author of the disputed document, or perhaps it was somebody else. And this task is called verification. Finally, probably the most difficult task of all is when you have a document but no suspect. Okay, because if you don't have a suspect, it means you don't have a comparison document, and that means that you cannot use known data. And the only thing you can do is profiling. So the only thing you can do is to narrow down the suspect list by extracting information from the disputed document that potentially can help with the investigations. So traditionally, the authorship attribution and verification are tasks that are commonly done after someone has been arrested, whereas profiling is more like an investigative tool. And what I'm going to argue today is that actually profiling can be used also at the stage where there's need for court evidence. So, as I explained in a recent paper, there are two ways now currently to do profiling. A first one is profiling by analysis of salient markers. So the linguist scrutinizes the text, and they use their own experience to find clues in it. So that's really it's a way of doing profiling that is heavily reliant on the linguist's expertise and perhaps specialism. Then there is another way to do profiling, and this is mostly focused on the analysis of style. So when it comes to, so I'll show you an example in a moment, but when it comes to this type of profiling, we're not really looking at salient markers, but we are taking in the entire text and analyzing it as a whole. So this is an example of a style kind of profiling. So let me just explain this graph. So what you see here, the x-axis are 3 tasks. This was from an experimental study where participants were asked to write text in 3 different situations. The first situation was a formal complaint. The second one was a letter to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the third one was a threatening letter to their boss. Okay, so these are fictional experimental situations. And what you see, so what is being measured in this text is a measure called Advanced Road 1000, which is a measure of lexical complexity, or actually sophistication. So how much the vocabulary is beyond the most common 1000 words. Basically, that's what it is. So in other words, it's a measure of how sophisticated the vocabulary is. And so when a text is analyzed like that, it's not about salient markers. So the entire text is used, and some measure, some sort of quantification of style is extracted from it. So this is what you see, and then you see 3 box plots. So the box plot tell you the distribution, show you the distribution for each task of this measure. So what you see here is that task 1, no matter you can ignore the colored dots for now, just focus on the actual square. What you see here is that in task 1, the median advanced row 1000 is something like just below 4. And this is higher than in task 2, and task 2 is higher than task 3. So in other words, we have the vocabulary richness goes down as the task becomes more informal. Okay. However, because, as I said, this was an experiment with participants, so for each participant we have demographic details, and what you see here is the interaction between class and age. So the red dots are individuals who come from a higher social class and they are older, and the orange ones are higher social class but younger. I think the threshold was 40 years old. And the other and same thing for the other ones, but for lower classes. Okay, so so what we see is that if we zoom in task 1, so if we look at the box inside the box in task 1, we see that actually higher older individuals tend to have a lexical richness that is higher than the higher younger, and again, this is higher than lower older and then lower younger. So in other words, they are on a sort of climb that goes down. So the same pattern that we see here is mirrored inside, but inside that box in terms of situation. in terms of social characteristics as opposed to situation. And we see the same thing in here, and more or less the same thing in this situation. So the reason why I'm showing you the graph in this way is because let's say now that I have a text, I don't know who wrote it, I take this text, I analyze it, and I get a score, an advanced road score of say 3. Okay, 3 is here. What does this mean? Well, if we draw a line, you can see that if it's task 2, then this means that it's more likely that it's someone lower or older. But if it's task 3, then this could be someone who is higher or older. So in other words, you have to, these kind of measures that we take from text that can help us to profiling are very sensitive to register, to the situation in which text is produced. So, look at here, for example, right? So lower younger in task 1 have the same level of vocabulary sophistication than higher older in task 2. So the profile could be completely wrong if you don't get the situation right. So for this reason, this kind of work is actually very difficult. So it is actually very difficult to apply these kinds of tools in real world forensic problems. And so if we cannot really do much with type 2, then this is the reason why most linguists today use type 1 to analyze text, and I mean for profiling. And the problem with type 1 is that it's heavily reliant on subjective analysis of a linguist. So to give you an example of that, let's examine this note. I'm talking to a room of people that might actually be aware of this case, but I'll pretend that you know nothing about it. So this is a ransom demand that was found by the parents of a girl who was kidnapped in the United States. So I'll give you just a few seconds to read it. Right, so when this letter was found, this was handwritten, by the way, okay? So any spelling mistakes were actually genuine, and the spelling, any correct spelling was also genuine. And what happened was that the police contacted Roger Shy, Professor Shy, one of the fathers of forensic linguistics, and asked him whether he could say anything about this person, profiling. Now, the first thing you notice here, no matter if you are a linguist or not, is the spelling, misspellings, right? So Ken, cops with K, daughter. And so one guess would be that, okay, this person is not well educated. But what Professor Shy noticed was that there are other words in there, like precious or diaper, which are words that are actually difficult to spell, much more difficult to spell than can and cops, but they are spelled correctly. Now, because can and cops are also two words that typically are not misspelled because are actually easy to spell, then by taking all of this information together, he was able to say that this person was probably well educated, but was trying to pretend not to be. And then the most important clue was this phrase here on the devil strip. Now, you probably don't know what a devil strip is, and actually most speakers of English don't know what a devil strip is, because the devil strip is this strip of grass that separates the road from the sidewalk, but it's only called like that in Akron, Ohio. And so Roger Shy was able to say, do you have a well-educated speaker from Akron, Ohio on your suspect list? It turns out that there was actually a person that matched this profile, and indeed he was the actual kidnapper. So this is great. It's a beautiful example of profiling. It's not very common, so this doesn't happen very often, but it's a great example. Perhaps one of the most similar cases of this kind in the UK was this anonymous letter to the Prime Minister a series of letters actually were sent to the Prime Minister and to other offices during this time. And one of the letters contained this paragraph, which I'm just going to give you a few seconds to read. Okay, one thing that many people notice when they read it is, I am ashamed to be white, which perhaps subconsciously makes you think that this person is white, although perhaps it's not really wise to trust anonymous writers of threatening and abusive letters. So maybe this is not really what is happening, but it's irrelevant, right? So anything that has to do with content is not what forensic linguists do. So the fact that this person is clearly saying that they are white, and whether that can be used as a clue or not, that has to do with psychology, not with linguistics. But this other bit is relevant to us. So a few bad-minded people sounds a little bit odd in British English, and it turns out that actually, if you look at a corpus like Globe, which contains various varieties of English, it is actually used in Jamaican English and it's not used anywhere else. And so this case was Tim Grant worked on this case, and he was able to say not that this person is Jamaican, but that this person has had some contact with Jamaican English, so it's a speaker of Jamaican English. It turned out that he was Jamaican anyway, but that's not really, you know, it's kind of out of the question, out of the powers of the linguist. So the profile was not used here to actually identify the person, but it turned out that it matched the profile. Again, two very beautiful examples, but you notice the commonality. So the way of doing profiling is essentially by identifying these bits that are crucial, but there is no method that can be used to do that. It's completely up to the linguist. And so clearly we would like to find better ways of doing profiling that can actually be explained algorithmically, because in this way the methodology is sounder. We can probably do this more often. So for example, I think personally, I think that many cases that we see contain these kinds of clues. It's just that very often we just don't know that they are so identifying, because we don't have corpora for everything, right? So we can only cover what the corpora we have right now have. Anyway, so we don't have a solution to that. If you're interested in this kind of topic, so am I. And so this is definitely an area of research for forensic linguistics, how to transform profiling into something that is more methodical. So what I will be talking about today, though, is not really that, but I'll be focusing on this case that I worked on, and that has to do with an alleged rape that happened in Ayia Napa. Ayia Napa is a holiday resort in Cyprus. Many British people go there for holiday, and this case actually involves a young British woman. So this woman went one night in, I think, yeah, it was in 2019, yeah, in summer 2019, went to the police station in Ayia Napa saying that she was raped by 12 Israeli men. So the police went and arrested these men, but these men were actually released soon after that, because the police asked this woman for another statement. So she made a first statement in which she said that she was raped, but they called her again to make a second statement, and in the second statement she wrote that it was not true that she was raped, that she made that up. And so on the basis of this second statement, the Israeli men were released and they were able to fly home. But the woman was arrested, because clearly accusing people of raping you is a crime in itself. So she was arrested, and but after she was arrested, she refused to admit that that was actually her statement. So what she said instead is that she was forced to write that statement by the police officers. Now, the statement was handwritten, so there is no question that she physically wrote the statement. What she was arguing was that she was forced to say, to write those words. So in other words, it was like a sort of dictation or strong influence in the wording of the statement. And so for this reason, there was a trial. And during this trial, she even told the judge, any British speaker would be able to tell that this is not proper English. So it is impossible that I wrote it. So it is so if all of this sounds familiar, by the way, this is because this actually is very. So sorry, I forgot to say. Of course, there was no recording of what happened in the interrogation. So why she gave the second statement, there was no tape recording, no video recording, and also no lawyer present for the woman. So the only two options, the only two possibilities are that she wrote the statement on her own. That's what the police claims, or that she was forced to write those words, which is what she claims. And again, if that sounds familiar, it's because this is how forensic linguistics was born. So the Evans case, for example, when Jan Svartvik analyzed Evans' statements, and he found evidence of police coercion, so that actually the police basically wrote these statements. And again, there was no recording back then, and Timothy Evans was hanged because of a crime that he did not commit. Very similar case is the one of Derek Bentley. That, you know, again, if you're familiar with forensic linguistics, you probably know this case. In which Derek Bentley was also coerced by the police to confess to a crime that he did not commit. And the Bentley case happened in the 1952, where him and another teenager, Chris Craig, were seen climbing a building in London. The police was called, and then Chris Craig shot and murdered one of the policemen that were called. And then following their arrest, Derek Bentley was sentenced to death, while Chris Craig, who was a minor, was sentenced to life imprisonment. But what Derek Bentley's family claimed was that the statement in which he said that he encouraged Chris Craig to shoot was actually not his own words. It was coerced by a policeman. And so this is a short extract from the statement. I don't want you to read it. The only thing I want you to notice is the presence of the word then. This is what Malcolm Coulter noticed when he analyzed the statements. And indeed, if you look at statements written by ordinary people as opposed to statements written by police officers, you find that the word then occurs roughly once every 500 words. But then if you compare ordinary witness statements against police officer statements, you see that they then appears much more frequently in police officer statements. And most specifically, and this is what you see in the Bentley set, most specifically, what Malcolm Coulter noticed is that there was a structure of subject and then, okay? And this is what, this is actually quite rare in English overall. And it's never found in ordinary written statements. And actually it's very common in police officer statements. And this is what was found in Derek Bentley's statement. So this is basically evidence that these statements were not his words, like these ordinary witness statements, but were actually more similar to statements that the police makes. And this is what Malcolm Coulter called police register, right? So it's the way that police officers speak, or in this case, write. Okay, so it's a similar case, right? Even though it's clearly a different time, but what they have in common is that there is no recording, so we can only trust one side or the other. So this is the statement that this woman wrote. Actually, this is one part of three parts. So the statement contained three paragraphs, but the first paragraph and the last paragraph are just kind of boilerplate text that she was dictated, and there's no disagreement that those were dictated to her. So the crucial part was the middle, okay? And I'll give you a few seconds to read it now. Okay. Now, this is copied word for word from the handwritten version. Okay, this was handwritten. So what can we see here? So this is basically a profiling case, right? So because the question is, of course, in a way, it's an authorship verification case, but in practice, it's not really an authorship verification case because we don't have comparison data for the defendant. There are no other statements of this kind that she has ever written. So in practice, this is a profiling case because the question is the profile of this person, so is the defendant composed this paragraph, which means is this paragraph consistent with a profile like the one of the defendant, or is it more consistent with the profile of someone who spoke English as a second language? And the methodology to do that is the same as for profiling. So in other words, you have to identify salient markers that can basically provide evidence for one or the other hypothesis. So one piece of evidence in this paragraph was the use of non-standard collocations. So, for example, the report I did, or doing sexual intercourse. So a collocation is a co-occurrence of two or more words that occur together more often than expected by chance. So, for example, strong tea is a collocation, and this is because, for example, if I were to say powerful tea, you would still understand me, but you wouldn't. As a speaker of English would not say that. So the connection between strong and tea is stronger than the connection between powerful and tea. Another example is a big mistake. We don't say large mistake, even though these are completely interchangeable options. And collocations do not have to do with words that actually co-occur immediately after each other. So it could actually be within a span of different words. Now, when we find because speakers of a language as a second language would tend to learn a language rather than acquire it, then collocations are something that are very hard for them to learn, okay, for any speaker of any second language. And this is because you, as a first language speaker, you produce language in a different way that is more, there's more to do with units that are longer than one word, more like phrases. And so these collocations are kind of inside your mental representation of language, which is different if you are a speaker of a language as a second language. So in other words, whenever we find non-standard collocations, it's very hard to explain them as if they are written by a first speaker of English, because or any language, because it would be, or it's almost impossible for them to produce something like that. But yeah, it's actually very likely that a speaker of a language as a second language produces this kind of structures. So this is highly indicative of a non-native speaker of English. Report actually collocates with make, not with do, and sexual intercourse collocates with have and not with do. And we can verify that, so we don't have to use our intuition. So if we take a corpus, actually here you see a bunch of corpora. These are different corpora, and the reason why more than one is used is because in this way, you can cover different situations. What you see is that make a report is actually is more common overall than do report, and even more striking when we look at do sexual intercourse or have sexual intercourse. The numbers are definitely pointing to what our intuition is saying as well. So all in all, this is strong evidence in favor of the defense hypothesis. So this would not be consistent with something that a native speaker of English would produce. Now, another piece of evidence was the expression was not the truth. Okay, so I was raped by Ayanapa was not the truth. Now, actually, in this context, it would be more natural to say it was not true. And again, this is backed up by numbers in corpora. But of course, this is evidence is not as strong as the first point, because for the first point, we have a lot of psycholinguistic theory that explain why and how, so it's very much established. This one is not very clear why it would be the case. So it's only corpus evidence, which makes it less strong than the first point. Another feature here is apartment. Now notice the misspelling, which is also present here in apologize. Now the misspellings are not relevant evidence because any misspelling was clearly introduced by her when she had written the statement. But what about the word apartment? Well, apartment, the alternative here would have been flat. Okay, and actually, if we look at, so the red corpora are British English corpora, whereas the blue corpora are American English corpora. What you see is that it is very unlikely for people for speaker of American English to use flat. So they're much more likely to use apartment. But in the UK, it is flat is more likely, but apartment is not as rare as flat is for American English. Okay, so in other words, it would be more likely for a British speaker to say flat in this context, but it's weak evidence because the difference is not as strong, right? Now, there is this is a very important thing to bear in mind. So clearly, in any forensic analysis, it's not a matter of finding the smoking gun, right? So it's any forensic analysis. It's a combination of different sources, different pieces of evidence, and each piece could be, each piece has its own strength. So some pieces of evidence might be stronger, other ones are weaker. But a forensic scientist who is doing their job in the most professional way will have to outline and explain all the evidence, even the weak ones. Okay. And then finally, this feature was also very important. So if you read this sentence here, I discovered them recording me doing sexual intercourse. So I'm focusing on discovering. So if you read this sentence and you're a speaker of English, you notice that there's something odd about it, but it's actually not very easy to describe what it is that is wrong here. And the reason is that it's actually very much in the grammatical structure of this sentence that that there is something odd. So discover as a verb in English discover is a verb that takes complement clauses as objects, and complement clauses in English can come in different types. So we have that clauses, we have in clauses, we have WH clauses, and we have two infinitive clauses. What we see in this case is that discover is taking as object a ing clause. Okay. However, in reality, most of the times, discover takes a that clause. So I discovered that they were recording me, as opposed to I discovered them recording me. And we can check now in corpora that this is true. Okay. However, it's not that this version with ing is never used, this version with ing is used in English. For example, we find it in corpora, like in the BNC. There's this instance of she remembered wandering around and then discovering him sitting in the lounge. I noticed the motion of her tail and turned to discover her stalking me. So there is a specific use of this construction of discover with ing, and this is a case in which the discovery and the thing being discovered happen at the same time. So in other words, normally when you use discover that, it's something that you discover at a later point in time. But when you use discover ing with ing clause, then the discovery and the action are happening at the same time. So in other words, what this sentence is saying here is that the discovery happened while the recording was happening. However, what she writes here is that from the context, it seems obvious that she's not referring to that. She's referring to a discovery that happened after the recording. And so a native speaker of English here would have said, in this context, I discovered that they were recording. And this is strong evidence in favor of the defense, because it's something that only a native speaker would know. And as I was asked in cross-examination, could it be that the defendant faked, so pretended to be a non-native speaker of English? Well, this would be very hard for her to do, because unless you are a linguist, and even as a linguist, unless you know the specifics of complement clauses in English and discovery, and you have access to corpora, it would be very, very difficult for you to fake your way in this particular way. Okay, so when we, after having all the evidence, we can just draw a conclusion. So this non-standard collocation is strong evidence that the not truth is moderate, apartment is weak. This last piece is strong. So overall, because it's very hard to find explanations for these 2 points really, then my conclusion was that linguistic evidence supports the defense hypothesis. So unfortunately, the judge did not agree and found that the evidence plus the evidence that was brought forward by other forensic experts was biased. And in the end, despite also the protests, she was convicted of being guilty of lying. The rape happened. Now, there was also evidence that physical evidence by medical professionals about the evidence of the rape, but this was also discarded. And there was a documentary that aired in April 2020, and perhaps if you're interested, you can still find it somewhere. Now, the lawyers meant to appeal for this conviction, and in the end, they appealed to the Supreme Court in Cyprus, who actually quashed the conviction. And so, the woman was actually found innocent. And this has nothing to do with the rape case, by the way. So this was the case about lying. So she was found innocent of that. Now, whether there's going to be another case reopened for the rape, this is something that's for now it's unknown. Okay, so this was the case, and this was an example basically of profiling, right? So profiling not used for investigation. It was a type 1 analysis. I explained why type 2 would be quite complicated to use, but the crucial point that I want to make here is that yes, profiling can be used in investigations to narrow down the suspect list, but profiling can also be used to, for example, exclude or include a candidate author, which is something very similar to what I've done here, or perhaps evidence of editing and interference, and who knows how many other scenarios, because in forensic context, always something new. So perhaps profiling can be used for other applications. Now, there is an argument that has been made various times that profiling cannot constitute evidence. But what I'm trying to argue here is that this is not necessarily true. So it depends on the case. It depends on the case, and it depends on the strength of the evidence. Because, for example, DNA analysis can be used, profiling evidence that comes from DNA can be used in court. For example, if you have a fragment of DNA, you can establish the probability that someone has red hair, or you can establish the probability that someone has a certain eye color. And so, if you let's say that for some reason you have a suspect, and you cannot extract DNA from the suspect. I would be shocked if this kind of evidence could not be used in court as well. Of course, it wouldn't be used to identify an individual, but in the context of the overall case, this is really solid evidence that a particular person had a particular profile. And the same thing can and should be done for language, but of course, what changes is the strength of the evidence. So whether, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that whether a profiling analysis can or cannot be accepted in court actually does not have to do with the fact that it's profiling, but with the fact that of the strength of the evidence for that particular case. And that's all from me. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm happy to stay longer for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. If anyone has questions, they can ask it directly or they can write it in the chat and I'll read them.
Thank you.
This was such an interesting topic, and the Ayı case was actually a bit sad.
Well, it was a very tragic story. I mean, if you imagine that, so this woman was, after going through all of what she went through, then she also had to spend a lot of time in Cyprus. She was not able to go back to the UK, and even after the trial, so she spent some time in prison as well. She was released, but then she couldn't leave the country, and then in the end, even when she could leave the country, she stayed because of the trial. So it took months, and it was very disruptive. So I mean, the only consolation really, and it's actually very important for her, is that the conviction was quashed, so she doesn't have a record, a criminal record, because otherwise she would have had that as well on top of everything else. Right, that's a nice question. So, which one of the cases you mentioned had the biggest impact on you? I mean, it depends on the impact, I suppose. But I think so the Devil Street case is definitely the one that had the most impact in terms of academic, in terms of like it's stimulating passion towards forensic. It's such an amazing job that Roger Shai did, and it's yeah, I think many students were fascinated by it, and perhaps many students decided to go in forensic linguistics because of that case. So in a way, that probably what had the greatest impact. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but so the only case I worked on is this one in Ayana. So the other ones I just I knew about it after the fact. Okay, right. So thank you. It's a question: how do we prevent the manipulation of the police? Well, clearly, if there was a recording in the room, then none of this would have happened, right? So if there was even just tape recording, and you would think that nowadays this happens everywhere, right? So it's so easy to record that we can do it with our phones, but actually it's not really like that. There are several jurisdictions. I think Spain is another place where not everything is recorded. So there are things that are not recorded yet, and for various reasons, which might still be good reasons, or perhaps they're not good reasons anymore, but used to be. And unfortunately, there's really, I mean, if there's no recording, if there's no lawyer, there is the possibility of something like that happening is unfortunately quite high, because police officers are human beings, so they are biased. They can make mistakes. They might feel that something, they are just people, and so people make mistakes. So yeah.
We have another question. It's can we avoid bias statements by only using authorship analysis?
Well, no, I mean, I suppose. Can I clarify? So, do you mean computational analysis?
It's what's written in the chat, so yeah, I don't know.
I was meant to ask
oh yes,
that question. Can you clarify what you mean? Is it if it's by computational analysis, then yeah, I mean, clearly, if we use a computer, then we know that there won't be any human mistakes, small mistakes that we all make, because we are not 100% focused, and we know that whatever is done objectively for every single data point that we are examining. So this is clearly helpful, but unfortunately we don't really. So there are several ways of applying computational analysis for authorship analysis. So for verification or attribution, but we don't really have good ways for profiling. So the ones that I show you, that graph was showing you the problem with this kind of analysis, and so we don't really have a good way of dealing with it. So that's the problem, because when you have a verification or attribution, you can always test the system in that particular environment and see, okay, does it work, does it not work? But when you have a profiling case, you can't do that. So you have to trust the answer. That's the problem. So I hope I understood the question and I answered it correctly, but otherwise, let me know.
Do we have any more questions?
I can ask a question if it's all right. I'm responsible for the technical background, so it's weird that I'm speaking, but my name is Sardar Servet. Firstly, I should introduce myself. And my question is, Mr. Nini, how can this, you told about the, you had the profile, but the judge made another decision that she is not guilty. So do you have a proposition or an idea of how to deal with this when there's a proper, how can we say, data that proves the guilt, but judgment is done otherwise. Thank you.
So, I mean, it's not really up to us as forensic experts to judge the value of the evidence. Because as a forensic expert, you don't really have a picture of everything that is going on, and also it's just simply not your job. So the job of a forensic expert is just to express their expert opinion about that particular piece of evidence. So if I'm a linguist, it's linguistics. If I'm a doctor, it's pathology. If I'm a fingerprint analyst, it's fingerprints. You know, you only focus on that. And then, so the way the law works, at least in the Anglo-Saxon system, is that you have a separate trier of facts that will take listen to all the evidence and then express a judgment. Now, for criminal cases in the England and Wales and the United States, this is the jury. So the jury listens to all the evidence and express the judgment. In this case, in Cyprus, there was no jury because that's the jurisdiction in Cyprus, and it was only up to one single judge. Okay, so the judge listens to the evidence and gives their own verdict. We can debate as to which system is better, right? Although probably someone who knows more about us, I guess, I'm not sure about the audience here, but someone who knows about the law would be in a better place to discuss this. But there's nothing really we can do and that we should do apart from just giving our unbiased expert opinion on the data, no matter which way it goes. And then as citizens, we trust that the law will do its job and actually come up with the actual verdict. I mean, yeah. But again, unfortunately, we are all humans, right? So, especially when the judgment is given by one person only, then there is more risk of failure, because if that person has political pressures or pressures coming from above, then they might not be objective. So, at least if you have more than one person deciding, it's probably a good idea. But if they only have one judge, there must be a reason too. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer here. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that was useful.
We have another question in the chat. It's, what do you think about the future of forensic linguistics as a field?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bright future. There are many more challenges coming, and it's not that we solved the challenges we still have. So I think that there is a lot to do, and the field is waiting for more more new people coming with fresh perspectives and solving problems that we still have. So for example, as I said, how can we do better profiling? This is something that we should have figured out long ago, perhaps, but we are now in a clearly we need more research in that area. So there is so much to explore, so much to do, that I can only see a bright future.
Since we're talking about the future of forensic linguistics, what would your advice be for the people who want to study or pursue forensic linguistics? Any advice?
Yeah, so my advice would be, first of all, define what forensic linguistics means for you, because forensic linguistics means so many things, right? So some people, for some people, forensic linguistics is just the study of the language of the law. Okay, so for some people, it just means authorship analysis. For other people, it means something else. So the first thing to do is okay, what am I interested in? Because you cannot be an expert in everything. So there is no forensic linguist who does everything, like trademarks, interrogations, profiling, authorship. That doesn't exist. You have to find your own thing to specialize in. And that typically means a specific subfield of linguistics and a specific methodology. So for example, if you're interested, so my own specialism is authorship analysis, and I don't do anything else. I don't do other cases. But if that's what you want to do, then you probably need to become more with statistics, computational techniques, because this is where the direction is going. And also cases nowadays involve so much data that you can only analyze with a computer, right? But maybe your interest is not there, right? So maybe your interest is in meaning ambiguous terms in the law or trademarks, and then you don't need any of this. You need pragmatics, and you need complex linguistics and semantics. So you have to choose what you like, and you just have to pursue that. And don't be afraid of choosing necessarily a program that contains forensic linguistics, because forensic linguistics is the application of linguistics to problems. So the first, so this is a famous phrase that was said by the late Peter Tiersma. If you want to be a forensic linguist, be the best linguist you can be, and then you add the forensics, right? So if you want to be an expert in pragmatics, you want to apply pragmatics to forensic problems, then you first have to become an expert in pragmatics. So that's what that's what I would like to encourage you. So just focus on one thing.
Thank you for your answer. If there is no more questions, we can wrap this up. Seems like there is no questions. I would like to thank you for accepting our invite and coming and presenting us, Mr. Nini. It's been a pleasure. It was really fun, and it was educational listening to you. I hope we get to do this again in the future, maybe.
Yeah, it'd be great to. I'm sure we'll meet conferences or outside some place in Europe very soon.
Hopefully.
Again, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you everyone who was listening for coming, and thank you for all the questions. This has been fun, and I guess this is goodbye.
Yeah, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.